Hello, world. Welcome to the 222nd, number 222, climate change emergency protest here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It is March 3rd, 2023, and it is also World Climate Change Protest Strike Day around the world. But in the United States, it's not going to happen. However, in New Zealand, if you go on YouTube or on my page, Facebook page, I show clips from New Zealand as to the people protesting, and my hat's off to them. But they've suffered greatly and immensely over the last few months concerning climate change and weather, which is flooding. And then they had a cyclone there, and then they had earthquakes. And you can attribute that to climate change or not. In a weird way, that we're going to start seeing more and more earthquakes because with the ice melting in Greenland and Antarctica and around the world, and the water going into the ocean, it's going to cause a change in weight in the ocean versus the land, and that shifting of weight has to cause an imbalance in somehow. And my thinking is it will lead to earthquakes and eventually to plate tectonic shifts. It can't help but do that. The system is set a certain way, and when you, like a basketball, if you move a weight, it starts wobbling things around. And not saying the global wobble, but what I'm saying is that the plate tectonics will start shifting, and we'll start seeing more and more earthquakes, volcanoes, and everything fun that goes along with that. So as I said, this is number 222. Next week is number 223, climate change emergency protest here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. That'll be on March 10th. On a personal note, I started my 49th year of running as of tomorrow, March 4th. I started running when I was 13 years old, and now I'm into my 49th year. So a lot of adventures and good memories, and I wouldn't have changed anything for the world. Running affected me dramatically, and like anyone, if you really devote yourself to a cause or two, it changes your life. And running has given me the ability in many ways to study harder or to keep at things and not give up, even when things just seem very, very difficult. So no matter what you do, if you jump into it, go down the rabbit hole, as I like to say, it can lead to good things. Put in your 10,000 hours of work, and things pay off in certain ways. Yeah, you get hurt and whatever along the way, but that's part of the game. So presently, right now, the carbon dioxide level is 422.49. As I said many times before, 280 is the safe zone, not 350, as 350.org keeps saying. That'll lead to massive changes anyway in feedback loops eventually, just at a slower rate. So only 280 parts per million is safe and below. That was in the year 1750 and before that. So we're at 422, so we're way out of line. Last year at this time, it was 419.03, so it's at 422.49. That is 3.5 points higher. Something dramatic is happening, and we better hope that the reason why the carbon dioxide is increasing is because of man-made reasons, such as emissions and things like that. And I suspect it is other things going on. If it's the permafrost and other places leaking out methane and carbon dioxide out of swamps and the permafrost as well, we're in big trouble. That means feedback loops have started kicking in, and we're soon at the edge of runaway climate change, global heating, and it'll be a hothouse Earth. And my suspicion is we're right on the edge of a real severe problem. And as I said many times before as well, 2023 is the wake-up year. And if you look at the United States right now and all the weather events that are happening, it is insane as to what's happening, especially in the West and the South, deep South. We're having tornadoes all winter long now. The West is having severe deluges of rain and severe snow. Some places have had 200 inches of snow. Some places have had 8 feet of snow. I mean, it's really crazy, and people are snowed in. People are going to die. And people are going to die more and more in the United States. We're going to lose billions of dollars if you're an economics person. Billions of dollars are being lost every year now due to climate change. And in the United States, it's insane to keep along this path. And the leaders in charge don't belong in charge. I am sorry to say this. Yeah, you elected them, but you elected buffoons. And the people that are doing electing are uninformed as to what the real issues are. They're being fooled. It's like a bull with a red towel in front of it, and that's all he sees. And meanwhile, the bullfighter behind the red towel or banner or whatever has a sword, and that represents climate change. And people aren't recognizing the issue. That's what's happening. I mean, I'm up to 222 of these broadcasts, and it's like, how much more will it take, till people wake up? Even while it's happening to people in California and the West here in the United States and around the world, they're in the middle of climate change and events that are happening that are life-threatening, and people are dying, and yet nothing happens. No one's protesting. No one's saying anything about climate change. And the reason behind that is the media does not cover climate change at all. I was going to say this later in the broadcast, so I might as well say it now. For example, today, they have some guy murdered his wife and kid, and they covered it for 12 minutes. Then they covered the weather out west, but they didn't say why it's happening, why things are going on. And that's the part that the public remains uninformed, because if you don't tell them why it's happening and just say it is happening, that's the same as adapting to the situation. Like if you get a flood, then move your furniture up, rather than preventative things, which is don't have the flood to begin with. So if they're not saying why it is happening, rather than saying it is, the weather is happening right now, that's the difference between adaptation and mitigation. If you say why it's happening, that is called mitigation. So let's see here, background extinction rate. This is one of the things that's going on right now. There's a certain formula you can do. I spent an hour researching it, and it's too complicated to talk to you about. Basically, it comes down to this. You should have minimal amount of extinctions going on every 100 years. Right now, we're going at 1,000 to 10,000, the minimum, 1,000 to 10,000 above the background extinction rate that you would expect over a period of time. So things are changing so fast that species cannot keep up with it, whether it's plants, animals, sea life, whatever. So we're going at 1,000 times to 10,000 times the background rate of what you would expect. This is an indication, another canary in the coal mine, that something severe is going on and is going on wrong. The International Panel of Climate Change scientists with the United Nations, they come out with a report every few years as to what's happening and what they feel is happening. But when they do, it's overly conservative, and they recant the previous issuance from 5 years before that, saying things are going faster than what we expected. Well, the reason is because they're using data that's up to 5 years old. So it's kind of like reading a book about climate change when daily things are changing so fast you can't keep up. Yeah, read your books about climate change. You cannot make that your source. If you're in a book club or doing things like that, you're not keeping up with the reality as to what's happening. You need to do your research. You need to listen to these broadcasts, not to be self-important here, but I try to keep up to date. There are tons of scientists on YouTube and all. There's Environmental Coffee House that does weekly updates, and if not every other day, Sandy does stuff. And the shows you want to watch for sure is Sandy and Jennifer on YouTube on Environmental Coffee House. They do an excellent job. So, we're at the edge of our limit of survivability, and people don't even know what's happening. We can't keep on this path and expect to survive, and people don't even know what's happening. So how do you explain to someone that they're drowning when they're in the middle of the river? You need to learn to swim, but you're already drowning. So how do you explain to them as to why it's happening at that point? They don't want to hear it. They don't care. They're worried about survival. People don't care about what's happening around them. They worry about paying their bills right now, which is understandable. But we're not going to survive this too much longer at this rate, the way we're going. Everything seems fine, but we're at several tipping points, like dozens of them, that are going to run out of control very soon, and people don't even know why it's happening because it's not being explained to them, and people don't want to take the time to learn as to what's happening. Adaptation versus mitigation. Again, if you adapt to the situation, that's waiting for it to happen, then you adapt to the situation. Mitigation means seeing an event in the future that's possibly coming and mitigating that before it does come here. But that requires people having knowledge as to why things are happening and connecting the dots and going, okay, this is going to happen, so I need to avoid this at all costs. It's like standing on a highway. Adapting would be after you get hit by the car, you call for the ambulance to get first aid. Mitigation would be I'm standing on a highway and there are cars coming and I need to walk off that highway. That would be a good example of that. So what we can expect in the future is just social unrest. Total social unrest is where we're headed. Climate change refugees, we're seeing them now. People are having to leave their homes and all and not come back again. There's all sorts of situations you can figure out that when the system is disrupted, that eventually you end up with government breakdown and political breakdown, and then people just aren't happy with the way things are going, and you've got total social unrest. So right now we got several tipping points that are in play, and it's happening now. The permafrost is melting, or thawing rather. The boreal forests are dying and also burning up. You have the massive amount of in Siberia, the peat bogs and everything are catching fire. You have swamps occurring that are venting off massive amounts of carbon dioxide. But you also have the Greenland ice sheet and the glacier on top of Greenland, and that represents 70 feet of sea level rise. So it'll take a long time to melt, but as it melts, it's going to keep increasing sea level rise. You have winter ice in the Arctic that doesn't stay around as long, so you get a darker ocean, which leads to more heat, which leads to less ice, which leads to more heat. That's a feedback loop. West Antarctica ice sheets, the glaciers there, that represents 10 feet of sea level rise. So this could happen very abruptly. As soon as the Thwaites Glacier ice sheet melts on the water and it breaks off from the land at the edges, then you're going to have a whole pouring cork in the bottle that holds back other ice sheets, and it's going to pour into the ocean, and you get all effects from that too in the ocean. But you're going to have, that represents 10 feet of sea level rise, and that can happen pretty abruptly. Another concerning one is the Barents Sea ice. That is a set of ice above Russia, and what can happen with that is you got tons of methane clathrates in the shallow oceans there. It's going to vent off massive amounts of methane into the atmosphere, and methane is one of the worst greenhouse gases out there. But what happens with methane as well, and I'm not a chemist, so bear with me here. Methane, when it breaks down, people go, oh, it only lasts a few years in the atmosphere. Not quite true. It can last up to 100 years. But when it does finally oxidize and break down, I'm not a chemist, breaks down, it turns into carbon dioxide and also water vapor. Okay, both are still a greenhouse gas. It's not going away. It's just not as vicious as methane itself are, which is a massive greenhouse trapping gas. So you end up with carbon dioxide and you end up with water vapor. So water vapor is probably the largest gas in the atmosphere right now as far as greenhouse gas. People don't talk about it. People don't know about it. So the weather with all these changes, such as the permafrost melt and methane going in the atmosphere with nitrous oxide and carbon dioxide, the weather is dramatically changed. You get a jet stream that's shredded, basically. You're not getting zonal flows from west to east anymore. Yeah, the wind will blow when specific storm systems go through, but there's not a consistency. I used to be able to, when I first started running, that if I knew the weather in Seattle was happening 3 days, or happening now, I knew 3 days from now that weather would be here. Now if it's happening in Seattle, I don't know where it's going to go. I can't predict it. So I have to look at the weather reports every day as to what's going to happen, and even hourly, because they can't predict the future as to what's happening. So locally, I had some ideas for locally, and could apply to you guys too that are listening. Let's start with something easy, okay? Electric bikes, e-bikes. Okay, you could get rebates, federal, state, and local here. You could have local rebates where you give people a couple bucks, give them parking spaces in town or parking areas for e-bikes. Federal reimbursement for e-bikes, I think it should be 100%, frankly. That would take cars off the market. Even if someone uses it 1 day a week or once a month, that's 1/30th of a car being used at that time. Alleys, such as in Gettysburg, we got these alleys throughout Gettysburg that aren't main streets, and they're hardly being used. You could block them off and use them strictly for pedestrians and e-bikes and bicycles. E-bike parking. You could have parking areas for e-bikes, and that would be recommended in Gettysburg. It's a huge tourist area, and you could have 20 spaces in specific blocks for e-bike parking. So let's blame as to what's going on. Let's figure out what's going on here. The public's uninformed. Why is this occurring? Well, at the federal level, the President of the United States, no matter which president is, now it's Biden, it was Trump, before that was Obama, not making the case concerning climate change. Not at all. Not mentioning it. Worried about the war in Ukraine. Fight, fight, fight. And we're going to all die as a result of nuclear war, some going broke or whatever. We're running out of ammunition. Russia's running out of ammunition. Chinese will jump in, maybe throw more ammunition in. But I'm calling upon the Chinese to establish a peace plan and just say, this is it. We're giving up on you if you don't follow through on this. Got to stop the threats to other countries. The United States needs to stop being bullies. Russia needs to stop being a dramatic a-hole and battling everyone and stop being paranoid about everything. I understand your paranoia because Warsaw Pact's nations are now part of NATO, and that's not right. The original agreement when the wall came down was Warsaw Pact nations would not join NATO, so that would create a buffer between Russia and Europe and NATO nations there. Now, now they allowed the Warsaw Pact nations to come in, and now NATO is up against Russia's border. Of course they're paranoid. It'd be the same as if Mexico and Canada joined up with China to become hostile towards us. Of course we'd be freaking out. We'd attack them. I'm not excusing Putin, though. What he has done is a war crime, and he needs to be executed for what he's doing. So there's that on that. So what's the blame, though? As I said, the president, the Congress, not talking about climate change at all. Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, not mentioning it at all. Nothing. He's worthless. Okay. Department of Interior, people run national parks, things like that. No mention of climate change, how it's dramatically affecting the trees. You go walk on the battlefield here in Gettysburg, you're seeing tree death everywhere. And I'm talking big trees, like 134-year-old oak trees and things like that. They're being dramatically affected by climate change. There's no desire to plant trees in this battlefield or anything, reestablish it. You know, they could do it in areas that are seen as being historical, because now, instead of worrying about history, we need to worry about survival. And we need to make this into the Gettysburg National Forest, not the Gettysburg Battlefield. You know, it could be the Gettysburg National Forest at Gettysburg Battlefield, but it needs to change real quick. We need to have trees everywhere at this point. State governors, these in Pennsylvania, we went from no fracking, no gas production at all, to now we're number 2 in the country and probably very high ranked in the world. These governors that we've had, Republican, Democrat, have all been frackers. That's all they do, frack for oil and gas. And it's sinister what's going on. Natural gas is nothing but methane, the worst greenhouse gas out there, or one of the worst. House of Representatives and State House, state representatives in Harrisburg as well, our state capital, saying nothing about climate change. Local town mayors, nothing. There's no mention of it. No plans. City councils, nothing. County commissioners, nothing. You know, there's no desire to change things. And they're not seeing, again, they're into adaptation situations, not mitigation. They're not seeing the potential future and the benefits of actually mitigation if you actually be proactive about things, such as I said, the alleyways, pedestrians, bicycles, and maybe e-bikes, parking areas for e-bikes, things like that. Parking areas for electric cars, give them free parking in town. Media, there is absolutely no coverage concerning climate change. Today, for example, the morning shows had up to 12 minutes of coverage on some murderer or some dude who murdered his son and wife. Who cares? Important to them, they said it's a national focus as to what's happening. No, they made it a national focus because they're not covering anything else. So they don't cover climate change at all. They'll report about the weather as to what's happening, but they won't say why this is happening. They're not having any experts in as to explain why it's happening, why these things are happening. Tornadoes down south in the winter, massive amounts of rain coming in from the Pacific, no mention of El Nino, no mention of La Nina, no mention of droughts and why they are occurring and things like that. So the public now, okay, this is you, me, everyone else, choosing to be uninformed. They could easily become informed as to what's happening with climate change. They could demand that people report about it, talk about it, things like that, politicians. But the public's uninformed. They don't want to know. They're too busy working or too busy watching TV and sports and murderers on TV and think that's the important thing in life, and it's not. So there's no desire to learn. They're worried about peer pressure. I've suffered immensely with peer pressure and family pressure and friends pressure and things like that as far as climate change goes. No one talks to me about it and there's an overall general feeling of isolation about this. And it's a shame because if I go out, that should be the first thing that people come up to me and go, hey, what's going on? I need to know what's happening. And I could easily talk to them 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, or 2 minutes, or 1 minute, or 10 seconds. I could, give a report on whatever, but there's no desire to learn. There's none. And people know that Tanya, my wife, and myself, we know about climate change. We know what's happening, and there's no desire to learn. It's not being self-important or anything like that. I'd like to bring people up to speed as to what's happening and make them proactive as well, but they're not. So there's a lot, if you look at it in a whole sense of the thing, there's a lack of caring for those you love, a lack of caring for those you don't even know, but lack of caring for anyone that you see that's alive, lack of caring about how people died out west, or down south because of climate change. So that's a public responsibility for that. So my assignment to you or to myself is to start doing something. Do anything to start. Do a broadcast, talk to your friends, do study for 5 minutes on YouTube. Just type in the word climate change on YouTube. Go to Environmental Coffee House, go to Paul Beckwith, go to Peter Carter, go to even Guy McPherson, who's more doom and gloom about it, but he's becoming more realistic as far as his predictions are becoming closer to being true than anyone else. There's tons of people out there. There's great college lectures on climate change. You don't have to sit through an hour of them. Just find someone and listen to it for 10 minutes. Kevin Anderson back in the day used to know what's going on. Now he talks about a carbon budget, which is untrue. We don't have a carbon budget when things are already spinning out of control. So do something, do anything, do a broadcast. I'm not an expert in this. I just chose to start doing this. I hate talking in front of public. So my assignment also to you is don't stop once you do start, and then escalate once you do know what's going on. Be more vocal. Start talking to your friends and family. Sure, make it easier on me if friends started talking about it amongst themselves and with me about climate change openly, and not be so, well, we can't talk about that. That's offensive and it scares people, and people don't want to be upset. I can tell you what's going to happen. When your family and friends start being affected, your place burns down or gets flooded out, you're going to be really upset as to what's happening, and then it won't look so bad to actually talk about it. But by then, it's too late. Adaptation versus mitigation. Let's get a conversation going. Start talking about it in public. All right, so I'll catch you next week. That'll be number 223, 223 on March 10th. See you then.